Our next big story is to look at the impact of fragmentations and impact of conflicts as regards global economy. You're aware of the invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing war that's been on for years. Aware of what is happening in the Middle East. But IMF has issued some advisories in this regard on how nations can navigate the effect of these global conflicts on global economy. Let's begin our business of shaping policy in this regard by bringing in our in-house analyst, Sam Orovwuje, who joins us this morning in the studio. Glad you have you join us this morning.
Good morning, Femi. My pleasure to be here. And good morning, Blessing.
Good morning.
Thank you.
I like this version of you.
Thank you
It
very
speaks
much.
power.
Thank you very much indeed.
And then authority.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's great. All right. IMF, there was a session that was held last week as regards how nations can navigate the effects of global conflicts as regards the impact on global economy, what they call the large shocks of that on the global economy. Give us a background to the impact of these. You've had that of the invasion of Ukraine. It's been on for over 2 years now. The impact of these on the global economy and why the IMF advisory is timely or coming at the right time for nations to be able to navigate the effect of this.
Okay, thank you very much, Femi. I think the first deputy managing director of the IMF was speaking at a forum in Central Europe. And he made a presentation about the impact of fragmentation, conflicts, and last shock on the global economy. And he made some proposals towards addressing the issues, particularly the impact of Russia war on Ukraine, that is almost 3 years now, and how that has affected the global economy, particularly global supply chain management, and the negative impact it has generally on the economy, and how nations, particularly Central and Eastern Europe, can navigate the shocks occasioned by the conflict. Maybe as we progress, maybe we can speak to specific issues vis-a-vis the advisories provided by the IMF Deputy Managing Director, Goti Gopinathan.
All right, looking at what the IMF has pointed out, that which a lot of countries already know, but it seems like the geopolitical tension is pushing such a great force that is causing more geoeconomic fragmentation. Now, using the example of the Russia-Ukraine invasion, which is really affected the economy of Ukraine and other countries around Europe. Now, the IMF also pointed out that because of these tensions leading to fragmentation, not just with the Russia-Ukraine invasion alone, but in other parts of the world, from 2019 to 2023 and even till now, there's been less trade even within economic blocks than between economic blocks. And this is really making countries to be more vulnerable. Now, in that context, what do you make of this situation and the need for countries to adhere to the advisory of IMF?
I think before we go into the advisory, it's important to address the concerns of the IMF, particularly as regard inflation in those countries that are at war. Number two, defense budget has increased astronomically to the extent that it impacts negatively on those countries that are supplying weaponry to Ukraine and Russia on the other hand. So if you look at the trend, the negative impact to a very large extent has weakened even trade relationship between even those countries at war. And if you look at the geopolitical configuration of nations that take sides with particular nations in terms of the trade arrangement, has affected the global economic trend in the last 3 to 4 years. In that regard, therefore, I think it has pushed the world to the fringe in the sense that particularly grains that come from Ukraine, has not been going to places where those grains should be in the first instance. So it has negative impact on the economies of those countries, even particularly Africa, that depend largely on wheat supply from Ukraine. Then if you look at the other geopolitical consideration, Russia, China, and other people have aligned themselves in a way that they try to checkmate what is happening between United States of America and the West on how they pursue this war agenda. If we come into the Middle East as well, same considerations are at play. So what we need to do is, why conflicts are fragmenting relationship in terms of how countries align politically, then we need to see how, first and foremost, we can address the issues of conflict, first and foremost, before we can talk about the shocks that impact negatively the economies, particularly in terms of bilateral trade among the nations that are at war.
Now, let's paint a picture of the shock this has brought to global economy, especially when it comes to public spending. I'm going to start with that of the US and then get to Russia. You're aware that the US happens to be the greatest supporter when it comes to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, to Ukraine, when it comes to the issue of weapon. And according to a survey done by a US official, so far in the last 2 years, the US has spent over $95 billion, while Russia, as regards this war, has also spent over $200 billion in equipping and also deploying troops. Give us a picture with this kind of huge investment and spending. What could be the impact of that on the economy of Russia, that of the US, and even the global economy, with this kind of expenses being made to procure this war as regards equipment on the part of Russia, then on the part of US? Maybe we'll do that before we get to the aspect of Ukraine.
I think the challenge here is that when there's heavy spending on defense, naturally the citizens suffer. Some of the monies that were supposed to channeled for other means in the economy are channeled to defense. In that regard, therefore, it has negative impact on inflation, the cost of living of citizens. So, and I think that's what Goti was pointing out at that conference, that when nations focus more on spending for defense, then the citizens will suffer. So in that regard, if we try and reverse that trend, if that kind of money that has been put in terms of defense spending, particularly the US in recent time, and you see the impact on inflation in the US, the cost of living, then if you just suppose it, then if that money was properly spent in terms of providing welfare for citizens, then citizens will have benefit better. But then that kind of budget, on the other hand, some are seeing the promissory note. Ukraine recently is still clamoring that the US should do the needful in terms of the promise they made in terms of supply of weapons to them. The expense or the budgetary provision for defense, some of those money has not been realizable in terms of what they can put to supply weapons to Ukraine in particular.
Let's also look on the impact of this war on the rest part of Europe, which Russia supplies gas to, how that has affected businesses and overall the economy.
I think there's a bit of politics when it comes to the supply of gas. In spite of the war, I think a greater part of Europe still take gas supply from Russia, ironically. But what is important there is that some of those monies realized from those gas supply, somehow they are tied down in terms of the problem that the West seems to have, maybe in terms of repayment of those monies, even when those supply has been made. Because of the sanction placed on Russia finances, some of those money has not gone back there. But it's not a total blockade. The sea supply gas to some country, particularly in Eastern Europe, while other part of Europe, because of the sanction placed on Russia, are taking gas supply from elsewhere.
Now, the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, which is popularly known as Ukraine invasion, has also given room for a lot of nations to realign when it comes to economic partnership with Russia, facing sanctions and all that. What do you think might likely be the impact of it? Because we're still painting a picture of the shocks now on the economy of Russia and then by extension the global economy. Now, Russia is looking like islands on its own now. Nobody wants to do business with Russia because of the concerns and interests as regards this war. You have nations having realignment when it comes to economic partnership. Give us an idea, even if you can give a raw estimation of figures that can be attached to this. What could be the impact of this on Russia and then by extension, the global economy?
We can say Russia is in isolation in the international system. In spite of the sanction, Russia still have a good relationship with China and even some African country. Even South Africa has a good relationship with Russia. If you look at it from the perspective of the BRICS nation, Russia is still trading with those countries within the BRIC area, despite those sanctions placed on Russia. But if you look at the negative impact of conflict, particularly the war, on the global economy, to a very large extent, because of the sanctions placed on Russia, the economy of Russia has been in comatose for some time now, and vis-a-vis the budget spending. And they're looking towards North Korea. So there are new realignments in the international system. I think Putin visited North Korea recently in terms to realign with North Korea to see how they can get some weapon. China continue to provide some solution in terms of the relationship. But when you look at it generally on the global economy, the impact is negative. The high level of inflation, the defense spending, and the shocks, particularly smaller countries that trade with those countries, has had major challenge in the last 3 to 4 years, and that will continue. So, in terms of geopolitical alignments are a part of international relation. So, where nations have strategic benefits from particular country, they will align in such a way that their strategic interest is sustained. But by and large, because the West as a whole is against Russia for the time being, Russia is trying to see how he can realign with some other country, particularly North Korea, China, and some other countries that I've mentioned earlier. So those realignment will find a way to provide some kind of equilibrium in the international system.
Looking at the alignment that has come from the fragmentation, according to the IMF, it has resulted in less trade because restrictions has increased more now than it was even before the pandemic. What do you make of that situation?
No, beyond the pandemic, because when nations were just recovering from the pandemic, Ukraine, Russia went into this war. So that has affected their trade relation with some other country. Why those countries, because of sanction, cannot trade with Russia and some with Ukraine? There are new alignments in terms of trading, even why there's a low level of commitment in terms of bilateral trade between those countries originally because of the war. They are shifting in alliances to see how they can trade with some other countries. So it's not really cast in stone from that presentation that was made by Gopinathan recently. So it's just providing the kind of impetus why nations should find a way to navigate their way, particularly these two big nations that are at war, which has negatively affect trade negatively. But then there must be a shift in terms of the relationship to other countries so that it can improve on trade and that can improve on the global economy generally.
Now let's explore another dimension to this conversation. You know, when you have conflicts of this magnitude, global conflicts, are there parties who are also benefiting from this kind of conflicts? For instance, you have the budget defense. If Russia has spent over $200 billion in procuring equipment, you will be rest assured that that's like a contract for some military contractors. There are parties who will benefit from that. And when you look at this, what are their concerns and how can these people should be handled, or how can it be handled to ensure that they do not compromise the desire to have global peace?
Number one, beyond the war contractors, those who work as mercenary in the war front, that's on the minor side of the equation. But essentially, those countries that have industrial complex where you deal with war machines, particularly the US and Russia, they benefit from supplying weaponry to countries that are at war. So they benefit to a very large extent because they find a way to make shipments of war equipment to where there's conflict. Number two, the budgets of those countries are enhanced where there are conflicts. So they are able to supply their war machines to those places. So in a nutshell, people benefit from conflict in the international system. Even most of the war-torn countries in Africa are orchestrated by these industrial complexes that manufacture war machines, which they supply. It's only when there's conflict that industry benefits. In that regard, therefore, some country, some people beyond mercenaries that are hired to fight on behalf of their country, and that was seen with the last issue in Russia, where Putin had a problem with with a man who was his war contractor. So it's beneficial, but if you benchmark it with international peace and security, there's a problem. Those who are mounting international peace and diplomacy are same set of people who are orchestrating wars across the globe. In that regard, it's difficult to strike a balance with those who promote peace and those who promote warfare. But more often than not, people benefit from the war systems that the big five, in most cases, try to escalate more often than not. And if you look at the example in the Middle East as well, you see people supplying weapons to Israel. Recently, just about 2 days ago, the Israeli Prime Minister was complaining that America is here to supply weapons, and that's going to have some negative impact on the way they execute their warfare. On the other hand, there are people that are supplying Palestine, Hezbollah, some war machines as well. And over the weekend too, you have Hezbollah, who has done a reconnaissance survey of Russia military artillery, and that if they try to strike a bullet more and the war escalates, they can match them.
This set of people, could they be genuine businessmen who just have business concerns and not any ulterior motive as regards jeopardizing the global peace?
If you supply weapons of mass destruction, as the U.S. Call it during the issue with Iraq, then there are people who may not be genuine businessmen who will thrive in conflict, and that's where there's money or there's business for them. So there are people who thrive in that regard. So they don't have regard for peace and harmony in the international system. So there are economic interests in terms of war machines or war power that they're able to supply to countries that are at war. That's when they make their benefits and economic gain.
Now let's talk about the implications of the geopolitical tensions, which has led to geoeconomic fragmentation. Different blocks now have been created, and some new blocks have been formed, while some old blocks have no longer aligning. So new trade policy, new trade alignment is what we have in the world. But let's look at how this affects the economies of country. Now, what the IMF says is that this could push more inflationary pressure on countries. And we've seen for over the past 1 year, countries of the world battling with high inflation. Some of them have been able to manage it to a level that they can deal with, while for some other countries, the inflation is still rising. So the IMF calls for more creative approach towards monetary policies of countries. What's your take on this?
When nations are at war and there's conflict, the economic fortunes of individual countries are negatively impacted, like as we discussed earlier. So what countries need to do, particularly in terms of monetary policy, to what extent can they remain a one digit, particularly the global north, that has over the years has a one digit inflation rate. Once you are in warfare, then your economic situation become very difficult. So people are fleeing conflict, then their productivity is brought into question. In that regard, therefore, that is likely to affect the level of inflation. So what IMF is trying to see is that to what extent can monetary policy across the globe can be managed in a way that it does not affect the productivity in terms of disposable income of citizens in various countries. Once that disposable income and inflation is high, then there's the likelihood that the amount of money that is available to citizens to spend, first and foremost, is reduced. The economic opportunity in terms of production and productivity is not there because of conflict. So we need to find a way to navigate the complexities of war, first and foremost. Like you mentioned earlier, to what extent can country realign with other countries in a way that trade balances are not affected with those countries. But how can we navigate this trajectory, very difficult trajectory, is that those countries that supporting war should look at the options of peace as a means of creating economic prosperity for citizens in their country. But once conflicts are sustained, then there's likely to be problem with monetary policies and inflation, and this heavy spending, deferred spending, will have negative impact on citizens. So we need to strike a balance in terms of geopolitical alignment. To what extent can we bring about peace? And there are some discussion ongoing currently to see how Russia and Ukraine can settle their differences on the table or at the table. So once those things are brought to bear, then we can talk about a better monetary policy that will help citizens of specific countries.
Now, let's focus on what is popularly referred to as Black Sea Grain Deal. That's an agreement between Russia and about 45 countries for Russia to transport about 33 million metric tons of grains and foodstuff to these 45 countries. Now, with the ongoing war between Russia and then Ukraine, and by extension, which has also affected the global economy, what do you think has been the impact of that on this Black Sea Grain Initiative? You know, the agreement between the disruption that has been brought into this as a result of the ongoing war. How do you react to that? The agreement between Russia and about 45 countries.
I think that trade arrangement has not been sustainable in the last 3 years, particularly from the perspective of the disruption in global supply chain. That 45 country arrangement has been ongoing, but when you look at the disruption and some pirates in some aspects of these trade channels, that has not been achievable. In that regard, therefore, those countries that were supposed to benefit essentially for that trade relationship may not get the volume of trade that they are signing to previously. But then, like I said, new alignment, new relationship, new routes created year on year to see how that disruption does not affect those trade relationships. But all things considered, it has had negative impact on those 45 countries that signed into Russia grains. Same with Ukraine as well. So it's not that they are not trading, but optimally they are not reaching the high level of productivity in terms of trade balances that those countries were supposed to benefit originally from that relationship.
So there's been a decline in terms of trade and investment for many countries owing to the fragmentation that is currently happening, which the world IMF has warned against. What can countries of the world, what can blocs do? Because according to the IMF, the more fragmented the economic system gets, the more countries will be vulnerable to shocks.
I think the challenge with the international system is funny in some regard. On the one hand, people are talking about international peace. On the other hand, people are beating the drum of war. Same Bretton Woods institution, the IMF, is part of the international system, where countries that have signed to the international convention in terms of peace and security are in breach of those peace and security. It remains to be seen whether the international system is really serious about international peace. And more often than not, I talk about selective morality and double standard in the international arena, where some countries, particularly the US, is mounting democracy and at the same time orchestrating war in order to be able to supply his war machine. So sometimes I'm confused about the way the international system is wired, where at some point the IMF is speaking that we should navigate our way, whereas the promoters of these institutions are the ones causing conflict, leading to this fragmentation that is jeopardizing the interests of global peace. So sometimes it's very difficult, and that's why people have always called for reform in the international system, particularly the UN, who is an ubiquitous institution that has not led to his billing in recent time. Look at Palestine and Israel. Look at Ukraine and Russia. So I'm not too comfortable where these institutions go about promoting peace. In actual way, those institutions that sponsor them are the ones causing the conflict. So how do we strike a balance in the global space?
All right. Let's wrap up this conversation by bringing it home, looking at what Nigeria needs to do. You know, the IMF was talking about managing or navigating the impact of this shock on the economy. For Nigeria, just like every other African countries who depend on Russia for these grains, we've talked about the Black Sea deal. What are the homegrown solutions that Nigeria can deploy to handling the impact of these on its local economy?
Diversification of the economy, particularly agriculture. There are research and development efforts within the store grain reserve, whatever. I'm not too sure of that, the full name of that agency. You can grow some wheat in some part of Nigeria that we can improve on using alternative in terms of beer manufacturing or brewing or some other grain that we can use as an alternative rather than depending essentially on importations of grain. We are blessed with good weather and some of those things can be grown here. So the government should focus and see how we can support farmers to grow those products in Nigeria. But then, for them to be able to grow those products, security is essential. So security is critical, particularly in northern Nigeria, where grain can be grown extensively. So that's on the one hand. Two, the government must constantly find a way to reduce conflicts, particularly banditry, kidnapping, and all that. So you can sustain peace in a way that people can live in harmony among themselves. And once you're able to do that, then you can have what you call food security and grow some food that will be sustainable for citizens of Nigeria. And all things considered, I think good governance will be the minimum threshold that will sustain the country on the path of peace building.
Talking about good governance, the IMF has commended Ukraine for what they've been able to do with monetary policy, how they've been able to align fiscal policy with monetary policies. What would you say to Nigeria's CBN in that regard?
Just about 2 days ago, one of the deputy governors of the central bank was painting a picture of the impact of the monetary policy, particularly the last one they had, that there is light on the horizon in terms of some of the policy initiative that the CBN has undertaken in recent time. But in my view, the inflation rate of 39.40% is still very high, and I'm sure lending will be a difficult task, particularly from small and medium enterprise that are the engine of growth of the economy. To what extent can they borrow money to be able to sustain their business? So the CBN should make more efforts in terms of monetary policy, and those on the fiscal regime should equally do well in a way that we can strike a balance between good monetary policy and fiscal policy. But the rate of inflation is still very high. They should find a way to bring the inflation down so that people can do business.
All right, thank you very much, Sam Rojo, who's a policy expert and also a social affairs commentator. Thank you for being on the show today.
My pleasure.
And that's it. We'll draw the curtain here. Until tomorrow, thank you for watching. I am Blessing AJ. Follow us on social media platforms at SOUQ News TV. Drop a comment. Tell us what you think of today's show. What are your thoughts on the issues that have been discussed? And you can do that on Facebook, on Instagram, on X, and of course on YouTube at SOUQ News TV. Until tomorrow, I am Blessing AJ. Do enjoy your day.
And don't forget, the conversation continues on our social media platform, and Market Insight comes at 11. Like we always say, Early Exchange will return bigger and better tomorrow. I am Femi Ayodele. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.